The wedding day was supposed to be perfect. The elegant venue in New York City was filled with friends, family, and love. I had been waiting for this day my whole life, the day I would finally marry Ethan, the man I thought I'd spend forever with. My heart raced as I stood at the altar, dressed in white, staring at the man I loved. But then, something shifted. As I looked into Ethan's eyes, I noticed him glance into the crowd. His face changed. It was subtle, but I could see the conflict flickering behind his eyes. And then I saw her, Emily, his ex, sitting quietly among the guests. The moment he saw her, everything changed. I could feel the shift in his energy, the hesitation creeping in. The officiant began the vows, but Ethan's voice faltered. My heart sank as he froze, struggling to speak. And then, in front of everyone, he said the words that shattered my world. I can't do this. The crowd fell silent, and my breath caught in my throat. I still love her. I still love Emily. I stood there, stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. The weight of his words crushed me, and the humiliation of being abandoned on my wedding day was unbearable. Without another word, I turned and walked away, my vision blurry with tears. I could hear gasps and whispers behind me, but I was too numb to process them. All I knew was that the man I loved had chosen someone else. Before the wedding day, the day that would change everything, my life with Ethan felt like the perfect love story. We lived in a charming suburban neighborhood in New Jersey, the kind of place where neighbors smiled and waved, and weekends were spent enjoying quiet moments together. For 2 years, Ethan and I had built what I thought was an unshakable foundation of love and trust. We met at a mutual friend's party, one of those evenings where everything clicked effortlessly. He was charming, funny, and kind, and I was instantly drawn to his confidence and easygoing nature. From that night on, we were inseparable. Our dates were magical, dinners at cozy Italian restaurants, long walks through Central Park, and spontaneous weekend trips. He made me feel like I was the center of his world, and I believed with all my heart that I had found the one. Ethan proposed to me 2 years later on a crisp autumn day. It was perfect, the kind of proposal that makes your heart skip a beat. He took me to the park where we had our first date, got down on one knee, and promised me a life filled with love and adventure. I said yes without hesitation, convinced that our love was unbreakable. But looking back now, I can see the subtle signs I chose to ignore, tiny red flags that I brushed off, believing that no relationship was without its complications. One of those complications had a name: Emily. Emily was Ethan's ex, and though their relationship had ended long before we met, she was still present in his life. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, people have pasts, and I trusted Ethan completely. But there were moments when her presence loomed larger than it should have. Ethan would mention her casually in conversations, nothing alarming, but enough to make me pause. He would talk about the good times they had, and though he never spoke ill of her, it felt like she was always lingering at the edges of our relationship. Once, I asked him why he was still in contact with her, why he hadn't cut ties like most people do after a breakup. He shrugged it off, saying, "We're just friends now, it's all in the past." I wanted to believe him, and for the most part, I did. Ethan was always attentive, loving, and present with me, but sometimes, when he'd receive a text from her or mention that they'd caught up over the phone, a small knot of unease would tighten in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, just my insecurities flaring up. I pushed the doubts aside, reassuring myself that his love for me was genuine. After all, he had chosen me, not her. We were planning a future together, and every step we took toward the wedding felt like confirmation that our relationship was rock solid. We spent countless evenings flipping through wedding magazines, choosing venues, and dreaming of the life we would build. Every time I looked into Ethan's eyes, I felt safe, certain that I had found my forever partner. But sometimes, in quiet moments when I caught him staring off into the distance, I'd wonder if there was more to his thoughts than he was letting on. Did he still think about her? Was I just being paranoid? I wanted to believe that those moments of doubt were all in my head, that I was overthinking things. Ethan had proposed to me. We were about to get married. I was the one he wanted to spend his life with. I never imagined that the woman I had been so casually dismissing, the one I thought was firmly in his past, would become the reason my wedding day would unravel into a nightmare. I didn't realize how deeply Emily still had a hold on him, how the unresolved emotions between them had quietly simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt. As the wedding day approached, I was filled with excitement and anticipation. I couldn't wait to marry the man I loved, to start our life together as husband and wife. Little did I know that everything I had believed about our relationship was about to come crashing down. As the wedding day drew closer, I should have felt nothing but excitement. Instead, I was grappling with a growing unease. Ethan had always been loving and attentive, but recently, something had shifted. He had become distant, preoccupied even, and I couldn't figure out why. At first, I chalked it up to wedding stress. After all, planning a wedding was no small task, and I knew he had a lot on his plate. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was bothering him. It started small. He'd drift off in the middle of conversations, distracted by his phone, or he'd come home later than usual without much of an explanation. I didn't want to be the nagging fiancé, so I let it go, trusting that it was all temporary. Then, one evening, he casually mentioned that he had reconnected with Emily. I felt a jolt of anxiety in my chest. Emily, the woman I had tried so hard not to think about, the one who had lingered in the background of our relationship like a shadow. "We ran into each other last week," he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "She's back in town." My stomach tightened. "You didn't tell me?" Ethan shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "It wasn't a big deal. We're just friends now. She wanted to catch up." I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was being paranoid. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's presence in his life was more significant than he was letting on. Ethan reassured me repeatedly that there was nothing to worry about. "We're getting married," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "I love you. She's just an old friend." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that our love was strong enough to withstand any outside forces. But as the wedding approached, I noticed more changes in Ethan. He was more distant than ever, and there were moments when I could swear he was thinking about someone else, her. The breaking point came at the rehearsal dinner. It was supposed to be a joyful occasion, our closest friends and family gathering to celebrate the day before our wedding. But when I walked into the room, my heart nearly stopped. Emily was there. I wasn't expecting to see her. I hadn't even known she was invited. She stood in the corner, chatting with some of the guests, looking completely at ease. When she saw me, she smiled warmly, as if we were old friends, but I couldn't hide the shock on my face. I pulled Ethan aside. "Why is she here?" He hesitated, then said, "She's an important part of my past. I thought it would be nice for her to be here." Important part of my past. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had thought that I was his future, that our wedding day would be a celebration of our love. But seeing Emily there, at what was supposed to be our special event, made me feel like a third wheel in my own relationship. Throughout the evening, I couldn't shake the tension between the three of us. Every time I saw Ethan and Emily talking, my heart raced with insecurity. It felt like there was an unspoken bond between them, something that went deeper than just friendship. I tried to focus on the positive. After all, I was marrying the man I loved the next day. But the doubts gnawed at me, growing stronger with every passing moment. Ethan's reassurances felt hollow now, and I wondered if I was walking into a marriage built on shaky ground. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Emily. I couldn't stop wondering if I was making a mistake, but I told myself that I was overthinking it. Ethan had chosen me. We were getting married. I had to trust him, didn't I? I closed my eyes, trying to silence the doubts, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The grand wedding venue in New York City was filled with flowers, candles, and the people we loved most. I had spent months planning every last detail, dreaming of the moment I would finally walk down the aisle to marry Ethan. As I stood in my bridal suite, adjusting the lace on my dress, I felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. I was about to marry the man I loved. What could go wrong? But as the ceremony began, something felt off. Ethan stood at the altar, his eyes avoiding mine. He seemed distant, colder than I'd ever seen him. I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach, telling myself it was just nerves, that once we exchanged vows, everything would feel right again. The music swelled, and I walked down the aisle, smiling at the guests who had gathered to witness our love. I expected Ethan to smile back, to share in my joy, but his expression remained tight, unreadable. When I reached the altar, I took his hand, but even then, something was wrong. His hand felt limp in mine, his eyes darting toward the crowd. I followed his gaze, and there she was, Emily, sitting in the front row, watching us. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly pushed the fear down. This was our day, not hers. I had to focus on us. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice warm and steady. "Do you, Ethan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" But before the words could fully land, Ethan hesitated. His hand trembled in mine, and the silence that followed felt deafening. I can't do this." My heart dropped. The guests murmured, confused, and I stared at Ethan, trying to comprehend what he had just said. "I can't marry you," he continued, his voice breaking. "I still have feelings for her, for Emily." The world around me collapsed. I could barely hear the gasps and whispers from the crowd. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't understand how the man I loved, the man I was about to marry, could do this to me. I glanced at Emily, hoping, praying, that she would tell him to stop, that she would stand up and walk out, refusing to be part of this nightmare. But she just sat there, wide-eyed, as stunned as the rest of us. She didn't reject his outburst, and that silence told me everything. "I'm so sorry," Ethan whispered, but I barely heard him over the sound of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears. I thought I could move on, but I can't. I can't lie to you. I can't lie to myself. Tears blurred my vision, and I felt my entire world shatter around me. The guests, the flowers, the candles, none of it mattered anymore. All I could feel was the crushing weight of humiliation and betrayal. Without thinking, I turned and ran. The whispers of the guests grew louder as I fled down the aisle, my wedding dress rustling behind me like a ghost of the future I had just lost. My heart raced as I pushed open the doors and stumbled into the cool air outside. The New York City streets felt like a blur, and all I wanted was to escape the pain, to run far away from the life I had been building with Ethan. Behind me, I heard footsteps, Ethan's voice calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to face him. I had spent years believing that we were meant to be, that nothing could come between us, but in one moment, everything I thought I knew had been ripped away. As I ran, I heard the faint sound of Emily's voice, and I knew. They would leave together. I had lost him, and worse, I had lost him to her. When I returned to my apartment in New Jersey after the wedding disaster, it felt like I was walking into a different life, a life that no longer felt like my own. The place that had once been my sanctuary now felt empty, stripped of the love and warmth I had associated with Ethan. My apartment was filled with wedding plans, gifts, and reminders of the life I thought I was going to have. And yet, It was all gone in a blink of an eye. For days, I couldn't bring myself to move, to do anything but lie in bed, replaying the events over and over again in my mind. Ethan's words echoed in my head. I still have feelings for Emily. I kept wondering how I had missed the signs, how I could have been so blind to the fact that the man I was about to marry still harbored feelings for someone else. Someone who had been at the wedding, watching as my world fell apart. The humiliation was unbearable. I couldn't stop thinking about the whispers of the guests, the way they looked at me as I ran out of the venue. It wasn't just the heartbreak of losing Ethan that crushed me. It was the public nature of the betrayal, the feeling that I had been the last to know in front of everyone I cared about. I had been abandoned at the altar, and now I had to figure out how to move forward. My friends and family tried to be there for me, but I couldn't let them in. The pain was too raw, too fresh, and I felt like I needed to isolate myself just to survive. Every phone call, every message felt like a reminder of my failure, of the life I was supposed to be living that had been ripped away from me. I stopped responding to texts, ignored phone calls, and buried myself in my own grief. But after days of wallowing in despair, I realized I couldn't stay like this forever. Ethan had left me, and there was nothing I could do to change that. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me. I had to start figuring out what my life looked like without him, and so I began to take small steps to rebuild. The first thing I did was cut ties with Ethan completely. I blocked his number, deleted him from social media, and threw away everything that reminded me of him. It was painful, agonizing really, but it was necessary. I knew I couldn't heal if I kept him in my life, even as a distant memory. He had broken my heart in the worst possible way, and I needed to give myself the space to heal without the temptation of reconciliation. My friends slowly began to pull me out of the darkness. They showed up at my door, uninvited, forcing me to eat, to talk, to get out of the apartment. At first, I resented it. I wanted to be alone with my pain. But little by little, I started to appreciate their efforts. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had people who loved me, even if the man I had loved chose someone else. I threw myself into work, immersing myself in projects that kept me busy and distracted. My job became my lifeline, giving me a sense of purpose when everything else felt meaningless. Each day was a little easier than the last. The pain never fully went away, but it became something I could manage, something I could live with. I wasn't crying every day anymore. I wasn't constantly replaying the moment at the altar in my head. I was starting to heal. There were still nights when the loneliness crept in, when I questioned everything about my relationship with Ethan. Had he ever really loved me? Or had I just been a placeholder, someone to keep him company while his heart still belonged to Emily? Those were the hardest moments, the ones where I had to remind myself that the problem wasn't me, it was him. Ethan had made the choice to walk away, to betray me, and that said more about his character than mine. Slowly but surely, I began to regain my confidence. I started going out with friends again, laughing, smiling, things that had felt impossible just a few weeks before. I realized that I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. I had survived something that I thought would destroy me, and I was still standing. But even as I healed, the scars of the betrayal remained. There were moments of doubt, moments where I questioned whether I could ever fully trust someone again. But I knew that I couldn't let Ethan's actions define the rest of my life. He had hurt me, but he hadn't broken me. I was still here, still capable of love, still capable of building a future that had nothing to do with him. As I stood in front of the mirror one morning, getting ready for work, I caught a glimpse of myself, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever been. The pain of that day at the altar would never fully leave me, but I knew that I had come out on the other side. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. It had been months since the wedding debacle, and I was finally starting to feel like myself again. I had moved on, or at least I was trying to. My life was no longer centered around Ethan, or the pain he had caused me. I had put him and Emily behind me, or so I thought. That was until one afternoon when I received a message from Ethan asking if we could meet. At first, I wanted to ignore it, to let him sit in the silence he deserved, but curiosity and a lingering desire for closure got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe near my apartment, a place that held no significance in our past relationship. I sat at the table, my arms crossed, trying to maintain a sense of control as Ethan walked in. He looked different, tired, worn, almost fragile. For a moment, I wondered what had happened to the confident man who had left me for someone else. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, sitting down across from me. His voice was softer than I remembered, hesitant even. I didn't respond, waiting for him to get to the point. "I wasn't here for pleasantries." He cleared his throat, his eyes downcast. "I made a huge mistake." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. That much was obvious. "Emily left me," he said, finally looking up at me. "Not long after the wedding. She said she wasn't ready for something serious, that it was all too fast." I remained silent, my heart hardening as the words settled between us. This was the same woman he had chosen over me, the woman he had humiliated me for in front of our friends and family. And now she was gone, just like that. "I was so stupid," Ethan continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't realize what I had until it was too late. I thought I still had feelings for her, but it was a mistake. I never should have left you." I crossed my arms tighter, my emotions a chaotic mix of anger, hurt, and something I couldn't quite name. I had imagined this moment so many times, him begging for forgiveness, realizing how wrong he had been. But now that it was happening, it didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. "You made your choice," I said, my voice colder than I expected. "You left me for her. I don't know what you want me to say." He leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. I was confused. "I didn't realize how much you meant to me until I lost you. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it didn't erase the months of pain and betrayal I had endured because of him. It didn't undo the way he had shattered my heart in front of everyone I loved. He had made his decision, and now he was living with the consequences. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Ethan," I said quietly. "You left me on our wedding day. You embarrassed me, you humiliated me, and you broke my heart. And for what? A woman who walked away from you the moment things got tough?" He winced at my words, but I didn't feel guilty. He needed to hear the truth, just like I had to live with it. "I know," he whispered. "I know I hurt you. I can't change that. But please, just give me another chance. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of something. Maybe it was the love I had once had for him. Maybe it was the desire for closure, but I quickly pushed it aside. I had built my life back up without him, and I wasn't about to throw it all away for someone who had proven how easily they could walk out. "I've moved on, Ethan," I said, standing up. "You should too." I saw the regret flash across his face, the realization that he had lost me for good. As I walked away, I didn't look back. For the first time since the wedding, I felt a sense of peace. He may have regretted his choices, but I didn't regret mine. I had chosen myself, and that was the only choice that mattered. After meeting with Ethan, his apology and plea for a second chance weighed heavily on my mind. He seemed genuine, filled with regret, but the memory of what he did to me, the public humiliation and heartbreak, kept flashing in my mind. Could I truly forgive someone who had betrayed me so deeply? Part of me wanted to walk away, to never look back. I had spent months rebuilding my life, regaining my confidence, and rediscovering who I was without him. Letting him back in felt like opening an old wound that was just beginning to heal. But then there was another part of me, the part that remembered the good times, the love we once shared, that wondered if maybe people could change, if maybe he did deserve forgiveness. I confided in my closest friends and family, hoping they could provide some clarity. Jenna, my best friend, was adamant. "He hurt you once. He'll do it again. You deserve better than someone who could leave you like that." My mom, however, was more understanding of Ethan's position. "Sometimes people make mistakes," she said softly. "If he's truly sorry, maybe it's worth giving him a chance. People do change." The conflicting advice only added to my confusion. Was I being too hard on Ethan, refusing to see that he might have grown from this experience? Or was I being too soft, risking my heart again for someone who had proven he could break it? I found myself replaying every moment of our relationship in my head, trying to figure out when things had gone wrong. Had I missed the signs? Could I have done something differently? And if I let him back in, how would I ever trust him again? The fear of being hurt a second time was almost paralyzing. I knew I couldn't go through that level of pain again. There was also the lingering temptation of revenge. I had imagined what it would feel like to see Ethan beg for my forgiveness, to watch him suffer after losing both Emily and me. There was a certain satisfaction in seeing him realize that the grass wasn't greener on the other side. But then I wondered, would holding on to that desire for revenge really bring me peace? Or would it just keep me chained to the pain of the past? What I really wanted was closure. I wanted to move on, to find peace within myself. But could I truly find peace if I forgave him? Or would the fear of being betrayed again always hang over me? I sat with my thoughts for days, weighing the pros and cons of giving Ethan a second chance. He had broken my heart, and part of me wanted to protect it at all costs. But another part of me wondered if walking away without giving him the opportunity to make amends would leave me with regrets. The dilemma gnawed at me constantly, leaving me restless and unsure. I knew I had to make a decision. Either I would forgive Ethan and try to rebuild something, or I would walk away, choosing myself and my own future over the possibility of reconciling with the past. Finally, after much soul-searching, I made my decision. I knew what I had to do. I sat across from Ethan in the same cafe where we'd met weeks earlier. This time, he looked more hopeful, certain that I had come to forgive him and give him a second chance. His hands rested on the table, almost reaching for mine, but I kept them firmly in my lap. I took a deep breath. I had spent days agonizing over this decision, replaying every moment of our relationship in my mind. The pain, the love, the betrayal, it all swirled together, but one truth stood out above the rest. I couldn't go back. "Ethan," I began, my voice steady but calm. "I've thought a lot about what you said. I understand that you regret what happened, and I appreciate your apology. But..." I paused, watching his face tense in anticipation. "But I'm choosing myself." His face fell, the hope draining from his eyes as he processed my words. "I forgive you, Ethan," I continued, "but not for you. I'm forgiving you for my own peace, for my own healing. But that doesn't mean I can forget what you did, or that I can go back to the way things were." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "Your betrayal broke something that can't be repaired. I deserve someone who values me when it matters most, not when it's too late." His eyes searched mine, desperation creeping in. "I know I made a mistake. I love you. I know," I interrupted softly. "But love isn't enough. I'm not willing to sacrifice my happiness or my future for someone who didn't see my worth when they had the chance. I've spent too long trying to pick up the pieces of my life after what happened. I'm not going back to that place." There was a long silence between us, the weight of my decision hanging in the air. Ethan's shoulders slumped as he realized this was really it. The final goodbye. "I wish you well," I said, standing up. "I really do, but I'm moving on." Without looking back, I turned and walked away from the table, feeling a surge of strength and freedom wash over me with each step. The chapter with Ethan was over, and for the first time in months, I felt at peace with that. As I stepped outside into the sunlight, I smiled. The future was mine again, and I was ready to embrace it, stronger, independent, and free from the shadows of my past.